A 7-year-old boy with a broken arm carried his little sister for hours after their foster father left them in the woods, when a hunter found them and asked what happened. What the boy whispered revealed a horror that made him call 911 immediately. Jack Harrington woke to the sound of a woodpecker drilling against distant bark, its rhythmic tapping matching the throbbing in his left arm. Filtered morning light cast dappled shadows through the makeshift shelter of pine branches he'd constructed the night before. For a moment, drowsy confusion clouded his thoughts as he tried to remember where he was. Then reality crashed back. The woods, the long walk ahead, the terrible weight of responsibility pressing down on his 7-year-old shoulders. Beside him, curled into a small ball, his 4-year-old sister Penny slept on, her thumb loosely tucked between chapped lips, dirt smudged across her cheeks. Her strawberry blonde hair lay tangled around her face, twigs and pine needles caught in the curls. Jack reached out with his good hand to brush a leaf from her forehead, careful not to wake her. These precious minutes while she slept were the only ones when he allowed his face to show fear. "We'll be okay," he whispered, more to himself than to his sleeping sister. "We'll find someone today." The events of the previous day played through his mind like a nightmare that refused to fade with morning light. Raymond's special surprise camping trip that had started with rare smiles and stops for candy bars. The drive that grew longer and quieter as Raymond's mood darkened. The sudden stop on a logging road, Raymond ordering them out of the truck with their small backpacks that contained little more than a change of clothes and a shared water bottle. The moment when Raymond looked at them with cold eyes and said, "This is where garbage belongs, in the woods." The sound of tires on gravel growing fainter as the red taillights disappeared down the road, leaving them alone in the gathering darkness. Jack shifted his position, wincing as pain shot through his broken arm. The dishcloth Raymond's wife Diane had wrapped around it 3 days ago was filthy now, stained with dirt and what might be blood. He knew from the way it hurt, a deep, pulsing ache that occasionally flared into something sharper, that something was very wrong with it. But he couldn't think about that now. He had to focus on getting Penny to safety. A small whimper escaped his sister's lips as she stirred in her sleep. Jack quickly composed his face, erasing all traces of pain and fear. By the time Penny's eyes fluttered open, he was smiling at her. "Morning, Penny Pie," he said, using their mother's old nickname for her. Penny blinked slowly, her blue eyes, so like their mother's, focusing on his face. "Jack, is Mr. Raymond coming back today?" Jack swallowed hard, tasting the lie before he spoke it. "No, remember? I told you last night. We're on an adventure, just you and me. We're gonna follow the stream until we find some nice people to help us." Penny's lower lip trembled slightly. "I'm hungry." "I know. Me too." Jack reached for his small backpack with his good hand and pulled out their meager supplies. 1 granola bar remained, along with a water bottle that was less than half full. "We'll share this for breakfast, okay? And then we need to start walking." He broke the granola bar in half, then broke his portion in half again, sliding the larger piece back into the backpack for later. Penny didn't notice. She took her piece and nibbled at it slowly, while Jack held the water bottle to her lips, allowing her just a few small sips. "We need to save some," he explained when she protested. "We might need it later." While Penny finished her food, Jack crawled out of their shelter and stood, surveying their surroundings in the crisp morning light. The Vermont woods stretched in every direction, a seemingly endless expanse of pine and maple trees. The early October air bit at his exposed skin, the autumn chill more pronounced than it had been yesterday. He could hear the gentle gurgle of the small stream nearby, the one he'd found just before darkness had fallen completely. Last night, he'd made the decision to follow it, remembering something he'd seen on a nature program at one of their previous foster homes. "Water leads to people," the narrator had said. That simple fact had become their only hope. Jack bent down and looked back into the shelter. "Time to go, Penny. We need to walk as far as we can before it gets dark again." Penny crawled out, her pink sneakers, once white but now stained with mud and pine sap, appearing first. She stood beside him, her small hand automatically seeking his. He let her hold onto his right hand, keeping his injured left arm close to his body. "Do you think we'll find Mom today?" Penny asked, her voice small but hopeful. The question pierced Jack's heart. Their mother had been gone for 2 years now, but Penny still asked about her sometimes, especially when she was scared. She'd been only 2 when they found their mother unresponsive on the bathroom floor, the needle still in her arm. Jack had been 5, old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, but not old enough to know what to do except call 911, a number their mother had made him memorize just in case. "No, Penny Pie," he said gently. "Mom's in heaven, remember? But maybe we'll find someone nice who can help us." As they began walking along the stream bank, Jack's mind drifted back to the first of the foster homes they'd been placed in after their mother's death. The Wilsons had been kind enough, with 3 children of their own and another foster child, a teenager named Miguel who'd taught Jack how to play checkers. They'd stayed there for 4 months before Mr. Wilson's company transferred him to Arizona, and the social worker explained they couldn't take Jack and Penny with them because of jurisdictional issues. After that came the Bryants, where Mrs. Bryant made cookies every Sunday, but Mr. Bryant drank too much and shouted at night. Then the Parkers, where they'd been separated, Penny going to a special placement for younger children, until Jack had refused to eat for 3 days straight and they'd been reunited. 2 more homes followed, each one a blur of new rules, new faces, new disappointments. And then, 6 weeks ago, they'd been placed with Raymond and Diane Mercer. "You're going to love it there," their new social worker, a harried woman named M.S. Collins who'd replaced M.S. Peterson 2 months earlier, had told them. "The Mercers have a big house in the country. No other children, so you'll get all their attention." At first, it had seemed promising. The house was indeed big, a 2-story colonial set on several acres outside a small Vermont town. Diane had shown them their rooms, separate but adjoining, with new clothes in the drawers and a stuffed bear waiting on Penny's bed. There was a tire swing in the backyard and a vegetable garden where Diane let them pick cherry tomatoes straight off the vine. Raymond had seemed nice too in the beginning. He worked from home in investments, though Jack never quite understood what that meant. He'd take breaks during the day to throw a baseball with Jack in the yard or to drive them all into town for ice cream. He called Jack Sport and tousled his hair and told Diane how well he'd chosen this time. But there were signs, small ones at first, that Jack had learned to recognize from their previous foster homes. The way Diane would tense slightly when Raymond's voice rose. The careful attention she paid to keeping the house exactly as he liked it. The dinners where Raymond would suddenly find fault with something. The meat too dry, the vegetables overcooked, and Diane would apologize profusely while the children sat in silence, eyes on their plates. 3 weeks in, the mask began to slip. It started with Raymond snapping at Penny for spilling milk at breakfast, his face flushing with a rage that seemed out of proportion to the offense. Jack had quickly grabbed a dishcloth and cleaned it up, apologizing for his sister while Diane stood frozen by the sink, her knuckles white against the counter's edge. After that, Raymond's temper emerged more frequently. He never hit them. He was too careful for that. But his anger filled the house like a thundercloud, unpredictable and terrifying. Jack learned to read the signs. The tightening around Raymond's mouth, the way his fingers would drum against a tabletop, the sudden silences that meant they should make themselves scarce. Diane would sometimes try to intervene, suggesting that Raymond take a drive to clear his head or offering to take the children out for a while. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't, and the argument would continue behind closed doors. Raymond's voice a low, threatening rumble, Diane's responses too quiet to make out. The day Jack's arm was broken had begun like any other. He'd been in the backyard with Penny, who was drawing with chalk on the concrete patio while Jack bounced a tennis ball against the side of the garage. Molly, the Mercer's aging golden retriever, dozed in a patch of autumn sunlight nearby. Raymond had been on the phone in his office, the window open to catch the last warm day of the season. Jack could hear his voice growing progressively louder, angrier. When the back door slammed open, Jack had instinctively moved closer to Penny. Raymond stalked across the yard, his face contorted with a fury Jack had never seen before, not even in their worst foster homes. He wasn't seeing them, Jack realized. They were simply in the path of his rage. When Raymond drew back his foot to kick the dozing Molly, Jack had reacted without thinking. He'd thrown himself forward, placing his body between the dog and Raymond's boot. The kick meant for Molly's ribs connected with Jack's outstretched arm instead, the crack audible in the sudden silence of the yard. For a moment, everyone froze. Jack on the ground clutching his arm, Penny wide-eyed and silent, Raymond standing over them, his rage giving way to something like shock. Then Diane was there, rushing from the house, her face pale as she gathered Jack into her arms and hurried him inside. Later, after Diane had wrapped his arm with a dishcloth and bound it with duct tape, assuring him it was just a bad sprain, even as tears gathered in her eyes, Jack had overheard them arguing in the kitchen. "We need to take him to a doctor, Raymond. His arm could be broken." "And tell them what? That I kicked him? Do you know what would happen? We could say he fell out of the tree swing. Accidents happen to kids all the time. They'll ask questions. They always do. That new social worker already doesn't like me. One whiff of trouble and they'll take the kids, open an investigation. But his arm is fine. Kids are resilient. Give him some children's Tylenol. It'll heal on its own." They'd spent the next 3 days in a strange limbo. Raymond was solicitous, almost gentle, bringing Jack popsicles and letting him watch extra TV. Diane hovered anxiously, changing the makeshift bandage and checking his fingers for circulation. No one mentioned a doctor again. And then yesterday morning, Raymond had announced the special surprise camping trip. Just the 3 of them, Raymond, Jack, and Penny. Diane would stay home because someone has to look after Molly. Jack had seen the fear in Diane's eyes, had felt it mirror his own, but neither of them had dared object. Jack, I'm tired. Can we rest?" Penny's voice pulled him back to the present. They'd been walking for at least an hour, maybe longer. The stream had widened slightly but was still small enough to jump across in places. Jack had been careful to keep it in sight even when the terrain forced them away from the bank. "Just a little bit longer," he encouraged, even though his own legs were heavy with fatigue and his arm throbbed mercilessly. "See that big rock up ahead? We'll rest there." The big rock was actually a boulder, its surface worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Jack helped Penny climb up, then sat beside her, his legs dangling over the edge. From this vantage point, he could see farther down the stream. There was no sign of a road or a house, just more trees stretching into the distance. Penny leaned against his good side, her small body warm against his. "Tell me a story, Jack. Tell me about the Magic House." The Magic House was a story Jack had invented during their second foster home. When Penny would cry for their mother at night, it was a house that changed to reflect whatever its inhabitants needed. Windows that looked out onto beaches or mountains depending on what you wanted to see. Rooms that expanded to accommodate friends. A kitchen that always smelled of cookies baking. "The Magic House is waiting for us," Jack began, his voice low and steady despite his exhaustion. "It's not far now. The stream will lead us right to it. And when we get there, the front door will recognize us and swing open wide." As he spun the familiar tale, embellishing it with new details. A garden where strawberries grew all year round. A playroom with every toy imaginable. He scanned the woods around them. The October sun was climbing higher, but the air remained cool under the dense canopy of trees. He needed to keep them moving. They had already spent one night in the woods. He wasn't sure they could survive another. "Time to go, Penny Pie," he said when he'd finished the story. "The Magic House is waiting." Getting Penny down from the boulder was harder than helping her up. When she jumped the short distance to the ground, she landed awkwardly and scraped her palm on a sharp stone. "Ow!" she cried, tears welling in her eyes as she held up her hand to show him the small cut. "It's okay," Jack said, kneeling beside her. He pulled the water bottle from his backpack and poured a tiny amount over the scrape to clean it. "See? Just a little scratch. You're tough, like Mom always said." The mention of their mother seemed to help. Penny sniffled but stopped crying, allowing Jack to gently wipe her hand dry on his shirt. "We need to be careful with our water. he explained as he put the bottle away. We can get more from the stream, but I'm not sure if it's okay to drink. Another fragment of knowledge from a nature show. Wild water might make you sick unless you boil it. But they had no way to make a fire, no container that could withstand heat. They continued their journey alongside the stream, Jack constantly scanning for signs of civilization. A trail, a cabin, anything. As the day wore on, clouds began to gather overhead, the sunlight fading. The air grew colder, and Jack noticed Penny shivering in her light jacket. Are you cold, Penny? She nodded, her lips pressed together to keep her teeth from chattering. Jack stopped and shrugged off his own jacket, a denim one with a flannel lining that Diane had bought him just 2 weeks ago. Putting it around Penny's shoulders was awkward with his injured arm, but he managed. What about you? Penny asked, even as she snuggled into the warmth of his jacket. I'm not cold, Jack lied, already feeling the bite of the wind through his thin, long-sleeved shirt. Come on, we need to keep moving. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had thickened, and a fine mist began to fall. Jack's spirits sank as he realized they were in for a damp, cold night if they didn't find shelter soon. Penny was flagging, her steps slowing despite his constant encouragement. I can't walk anymore, she finally said, stopping in her tracks. My feet hurt. I'm hungry. I want to go home. The despair in her voice nearly broke him. They had no home, not really. Just a series of houses where they'd been temporary guests at best, unwanted burdens at worst. I know, Penny Pie. I know it's hard. But we have to keep going. When she shook her head, tears mingling with the mist on her cheeks, Jack made a decision. He knelt down in front of her, his back to her. Climb on, he said. I'll carry you for a while. But your arm is fine, he said, using the same dismissive tone Raymond had used with Diane. Come on. It's getting late, and we need to find a place to sleep. Penny hesitated, then climbed onto his back, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Jack gritted his teeth against the pain as he stood, adjusting her weight to minimize pressure on his broken arm. She was light for a 4-year-old, but still, every step sent jolts of agony through his injured limb. He walked on, one foot in front of the other, focusing on the sound of the stream to his right, on Penny's soft breathing against his ear, on anything but the pain. The mist thickened into a light rain, soaking through his shirt, but the jacket he'd given Penny kept her relatively dry. As the daylight began to fade, Jack finally spotted what he'd been searching for. A small clearing beneath a stand of pine trees. The ground there would be drier, the dense branches providing some protection from the rain. He carried Penny to the spot and gently set her down. We'll stay here tonight, he said, trying to sound confident. I'll make us a shelter like I did yesterday. Using his good arm and, when necessary, his teeth, Jack gathered fallen branches and pine boughs, arranging them against a low-hanging branch to create a crude lean-to. The work exhausted him, but he pushed on, knowing that staying dry through the night was critical. When the shelter was finished, he coaxed Penny inside and gave her the remaining portion of his granola bar along with a few carefully measured sips of water. The last light was fading from the sky, and with it, Jack's hope that someone would find them before nightfall. Are we going to be okay, Jack? Penny asked, her voice small in the gathering darkness. Jack lay down beside her, positioning himself between her and the shelter's opening. Yes, he said firmly. We're going to be fine. Tomorrow we'll keep following the stream, and we'll find people who will help us. Promise. I promise, Penny Pie. And in that moment, despite everything, he believed it. He had to. Outside their shelter, the rain fell steadily, its gentle patter on the pine needles almost soothing. Jack pulled Penny close, sharing what warmth he could. She fell asleep quickly, exhausted from their long day, but Jack remained awake, listening to the night sounds of the forest and fighting against his own fatigue. He thought of their mother then, of her clear blue eyes, Penny's eyes, and her laugh that could fill a room. Of the good days when she'd been clean, when she'd make pancakes shaped like animals and take them to the park. Of her whispered promise the last time the social worker had come to check on them, her arms wrapped around them both. It's going to get better, I swear. I'm trying so hard for you too. She hadn't been able to keep that promise. The pull of heroin had been stronger than her love for them, though Jack never doubted she had loved them. It was why he had to be strong now, why he had to get Penny to safety. He'd promised his mother once, as she lay sleeping on the couch, that he would always take care of his little sister. It was the one promise he intended to keep. In the darkness of the Vermont forest, rain seeping through their makeshift shelter and pain radiating from his broken arm, 7-year-old Jack Harrington finally allowed himself a single, silent tear. Then, pulling Penny closer, he closed his eyes and surrendered to a fitful sleep. Miles away, in the Mercer house, Diane sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. The house was silent. Raymond had left hours ago, taking most of their savings and leaving her with a warning not to call anyone if she knew what was good for her. But as the clock ticked past midnight and the rain continued to fall, Diane reached for the phone. Her hand trembled as she dialed, but her voice was steady when the dispatcher answered. "I need to report 2 missing children," she said. "Please hurry. They're out there alone in the woods." Morning came with reluctant fingers of light penetrating the pine boughs of their shelter. Jack woke first, his body stiff and chilled, his broken arm a constant, throbbing presence. The rain had stopped sometime during the night, but everything remained damp. Their clothes, the ground beneath them, the very air they breathed. For a moment, he lay still, listening to Penny's soft breathing beside him, trying to gather strength for the day ahead. When he finally moved, pain shot through his arm with such intensity that he had to bite his lip to keep from crying out. In the dim light filtering through the branches, he examined the dishcloth wrapping. It had slipped during the night, revealing angry red skin beneath. Jack didn't know much about broken bones, but he knew enough to be worried by the swelling and the heat radiating from his forearm. He carefully readjusted the makeshift bandage, securing it as best he could with just one hand. The movement caused Penny to stir, her small body curling closer to his warmth before her eyes fluttered open. "Morning already?" she mumbled, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Yeah, Penny pie. The rain stopped. That's good, right?" She nodded, sitting up and looking around their small shelter as if seeing it for the first time. "I'm really hungry, Jack." The words twisted in his chest. Their meager supplies were gone, the granola bar finished, the water bottle nearly empty. He'd been too exhausted last night to think beyond creating shelter, but now the reality of their situation pressed down on him with crushing weight. "Me too," he admitted. "But I have an idea. Let's go look by the stream. Maybe we can find some berries or something." It was a desperate hope, but it was all he had. Jack helped Penny out of the shelter, noticing how she winced when she stood. Her sneakers were soaked through, and he could see a blister forming on her heel where the wet material had rubbed against her skin. The morning air was crisp and cold, their breath visible in small clouds. Jack returned his jacket to Penny, ignoring her protests that he should wear it. The stream gurgled nearby, slightly higher than it had been yesterday due to the rain. They made their way toward it, Jack scanning the underbrush for anything edible. "Look!" Penny suddenly exclaimed, pointing to a cluster of bushes near the water's edge. "Berries!" Jack's heart leapt, then immediately plummeted as he recognized the bright red berries. "Don't touch those, Penny. They're not good to eat." Another fragment of knowledge from a school field trip. Red berries in clusters were often poisonous. The naturalist who'd led their class through a state park had pointed them out, warning the children to never eat wild berries unless an adult identified them as safe. Disappointment clouded Penny's face, but she obediently stepped back from the bush. They continued along the stream, both scanning for anything edible. After nearly 20 minutes of searching, Jack spotted what he was looking for. A blackberry bush, its dark fruit glistening with morning dew. "These are okay," he said, relief washing through him as he recognized the distinctive shape. "I've seen these at the farmer's market. They're blackberries." They picked the ripe berries eagerly, their fingers soon stained purple with juice. There weren't many. It was late in the season, but each tiny fruit was a burst of sweetness that temporarily quieted the gnawing in their stomachs. While they ate, Jack formulated a plan for the day. They would continue following the stream, which seemed to be widening as they traveled. That had to be a good sign, didn't it? Larger streams led to rivers, and rivers led to towns. At least he hoped they did. "Ready to go?" he asked when the last berry was gone. "We need to walk as far as we can today." Penny nodded solemnly, but he could see the fatigue already present in her small face. Her usual boundless energy had been sapped by hunger, cold, and fear. Still, she took his hand without complaint as they set off once more, the stream their only guide in the wilderness. The day progressed slowly, marked by brief rests and increasingly difficult terrain. The land began to slope downward, forcing them to navigate around fallen trees and over slippery rocks. Jack's arm protested with every jarring step, but he kept his pain hidden from Penny, distracting her with stories and games whenever she began to flag. "Let's play I Spy," he suggested during one of their rest periods. "I'll go first. I spy with my little eye something green." Penny looked around at the forest surrounding them, a small smile forming despite her exhaustion. "That's everything, Jack." "Nope, just one specific green thing." That big fern over there?" "No, try again." The game continued, providing a brief respite from their situation. Jack tried to keep his voice light, to maintain the pretense that this was indeed just an adventure rather than a desperate struggle for survival. But as the day wore on and Penny grew more tired, it became increasingly difficult to maintain the facade. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had returned, and a cold drizzle began to fall. Jack's shirt, which had almost dried during the morning hours, was quickly soaked through again. Penny huddled in his jacket, but even that was beginning to let moisture seep through. They needed to find better shelter, and soon. "Jack, I can't walk anymore," Penny finally said, stopping in her tracks. Her face was pale beneath the dirt smudges, her lips tinged with blue from the cold. Without hesitation, Jack knelt down, presenting his back to her. "Climb on. I'll carry you for a while." "But your arm is fine," he insisted, though they both knew it was a lie. "Come on, Penny Pie. We need to keep moving." Penny climbed onto his back, her arms loose around his neck. Jack stood carefully, adjusting her weight as best he could to minimize pressure on his broken arm. Even so, each step sent spikes of agony through him, and he had to force himself to keep putting one foot in front of the other. The stream had widened significantly now, becoming a proper creek with a stronger current. The rain made the ground slippery, and twice Jack nearly fell, catching himself at the last moment to prevent them both from tumbling down the increasingly steep bank. His vision occasionally blurred, whether from pain or exhaustion or the beginning of fever, he couldn't tell. Just when he felt he couldn't go any farther, the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing beside the creek. In the center stood what looked like an abandoned hunting blind, a small wooden structure raised on stilts, with walls on 3 sides and a partial roof. It wasn't much, but it was better than anything they'd had since being left in the woods. "Look, Penny," Jack said, his voice hoarse with effort. "A little house. We can stay there tonight." He set Penny down carefully, then examined the structure. The wooden ladder leading up to the platform was rotted in places but still usable. Inside, the floor was relatively dry, protected from the rain by the remains of the roof. It would be cold, with one wall completely open to the elements, but at least they'd be off the ground and partially sheltered. "I'll go up first," Jack said, testing the ladder with his weight. "Then I'll help you up." Climbing one-handed was difficult, but he managed to reach the platform. Once there, he turned and called down to Penny, guiding her up each rung of the ladder until she scrambled onto the platform beside him. The small space, about 6 feet square, was empty except for an old plastic bucket in one corner and a few empty beer cans that spoke of occasional human presence. Jack kicked the cans aside and helped Penny get settled in the driest corner. "We'll stay here tonight," he said, trying to sound confident. "Tomorrow we'll keep following the creek. I think we're getting closer to finding people." In truth, he had no idea if they were any closer to rescue than they had been yesterday. The Vermont wilderness seemed endless, the trees stretching in every direction with no sign of roads or houses or anything remotely civilized. But he couldn't let Penny see his doubt. The light was fading rapidly now, the cloudy sky hastening nightfall. Jack took stock of their situation. No food, almost no water, wet clothes, and temperatures that would likely drop further after dark. And his arm. He didn't want to think about his arm, about the deep, pulsing ache that occasionally sharpened into something so intense it momentarily stole his breath. "I'm cold, Jack," Penny said, her teeth chattering. "And my tummy hurts." Jack sat beside her, wrapping his good arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. "I know, Penny Pie. Mine too. But we'll be okay. Remember what Mom used to say. Harringtons are tough as nails." Penny nodded against his shoulder. "And twice as sharp." The familiar saying brought a lump to Jack's throat. Their mother, for all her failures, had loved them fiercely. On her good days, she'd been full of these little sayings, affirmations of their strength, their resilience, their worth. Jack clung to them now, using them to bolster his failing courage. "Tell me about the magic house again," Penny requested, her voice small in the gathering darkness. Jack began the familiar tale, embellishing it with new details. A fireplace that lit itself when you were cold, beds with the softest blankets imaginable, a pantry that was always stocked with their favorite foods. As he spoke, he could almost feel the phantom warmth of the imaginary fire, could almost taste the hot chocolate and cookies he described. Penny fell asleep before the story was finished, exhaustion finally claiming her. Jack continued to hold her, listening to the rain pattering on the partial roof above them and the creek rushing below. He was so tired, his body aching with a bone-deep weariness that made his eyelids heavy. But he fought against sleep, afraid of what might happen if he surrendered to it. His thoughts turned to the search that must be underway by now. Surely Diane had called someone, had told them about Raymond abandoning the children in the woods. But would they know where to look? The logging road where Raymond had left them was miles from any main highway, and they'd been walking for nearly 2 days now. How would anyone find them in this vast wilderness? The rain increased, driven by a rising wind that cut through their wet clothes like knives. Jack pulled Penny closer, trying to shield her from the worst of it. His broken arm throbbed in time with his heartbeat, and he could feel heat radiating from it despite the cold air. An infection, probably. He remembered a boy at one of their foster homes who'd fallen from a tree and broken his wrist. The foster parents had taken him to the hospital immediately, and even with proper medical care, he'd developed an infection that required antibiotics. Jack had no antibiotics, no proper care, nothing but his own determination to keep Penny safe. And that determination was being tested to its limits as pain and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. He must have dozed off despite his efforts, because the next thing he knew, he was jerking awake to the sound of Penny's voice. "Jack! Jack! There's something out there!" Instantly alert, Jack strained to hear through the sound of rain and wind. At first, he caught nothing unusual, but then, a snuffling noise, branches breaking beneath heavy footsteps. Something was moving in the underbrush below their shelter. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. A bear? A wolf? He had no idea what kinds of predators roamed the Vermont woods, but he was suddenly, acutely aware of how vulnerable they were. 2 small children with no weapons, no way to defend themselves. "Shoo!" he whispered to Penny, who was clutching his arm in terror. "It's okay. We're up high. He can't get to us." He hoped that was true. The hunting blind was elevated about 6 feet off the ground, presumably to give hunters a better vantage point and to keep them out of the line of sight of deer. But would that height deter a determined predator? The sounds grew louder, closer. Jack pulled Penny behind him, positioning himself between her and the open side of the blind. If something tried to climb up, it would have to get through him first. A shadow moved at the base of the blind, visible even in the dim light. Jack held his breath, every muscle tensed for her. What? He couldn't fight, couldn't run. All he could do was wait and pray that whatever was out there would lose interest and move on. The creature emerged from the underbrush into a small patch of moonlight, and Jack nearly collapsed with relief. It wasn't a bear or a wolf, but a raccoon. its masked face tilted up toward them curiously. The animal sniffed the air, apparently caught the scent of humans, and decided they weren't worth investigating further. It ambled off into the darkness, leaving only the sound of the rain once more. "It's gone," Jack said, feeling Penny's small body still trembling against his back. "It was just a raccoon, like in that book we read, remember? Ricky Raccoon's Nighttime Adventure." Penny peeked around him, her eyes wide. "Are you sure it's gone?" "I'm sure. Raccoons don't bother people. He was probably just looking for food." The mention of food made Jack's stomach clench painfully. They hadn't eaten anything since the blackberries that morning, and even those had been a meager breakfast. Tomorrow they would need to find more food or— He pushed the thought away. They would find food. They would find people. They had to. The rest of the night passed in fitful snatches of sleep, interrupted by rain, cold, and pain. Jack's arm had gone from throbbing to a relentless burning sensation that radiated up to his shoulder and down to his fingertips. He tried to check it in the darkness but could only feel that the swelling had increased, stretching the dirty dishcloth to its limits. By the time gray light began to filter through the trees again, Jack felt worse than he had the previous morning. His head pounded, and his body alternated between chills and waves of heat that had nothing to do with the external temperature. But Penny was looking at him with trust in her blue eyes, and so he forced himself to smile, to act as if everything was normal. "Ready for another adventure day?" he asked, his voice surprisingly hoarse. Penny nodded, though without enthusiasm. "I'm really hungry, Jack. And thirsty." Their water bottle was empty now. Jack had given Penny the last few sips before she'd fallen asleep. "We'll drink from the creek," he decided, though he wasn't sure if that was safe. But dehydration was a more immediate danger than whatever might be in the water. They descended the ladder carefully, Jack going first to catch Penny if she slipped. The morning was cool but clearer than it had been the previous day, the rain having moved on during the night. The creek rushed past, swollen from the rainfall, its current stronger than before. Jack led Penny to the edge, where they both cupped water in their hands and drank thirstily. The water was cold and tasted of earth and stones, but it was the most refreshing thing Jack had ever experienced. They filled their bottle as well, though drinking directly from the creek was easier than trying to fill the narrow-mouthed container with just one hand. "Now we need to find some breakfast," Jack said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Let's look for more berries while we walk." They set off along the creek bank, both scanning for anything edible. The terrain continued to slope downward, the path alongside the water becoming increasingly treacherous. In places, they had to climb over fallen trees or navigate around sections where the bank had eroded, leaving nothing but a steep drop to the rushing water below. Jack's condition deteriorated as the morning wore on. The fever that had been threatening now took hold in earnest, making his movements clumsy and his thoughts sluggish. Several times he had to stop and lean against a tree, waiting for a wave of dizziness to pass. He tried to hide it from Penny, but she was becoming increasingly concerned. "You don't look good, Jack," she said during one of these stops, her small face pinched with worry. "Your cheeks are all red, but you're shivering." "I'm fine," he insisted, pushing himself away from the tree trunk. "Just a little tired." "Come on, we need to keep moving." They continued their journey, the creek their constant companion. Around midday, their luck improved slightly when they discovered a patch of wild raspberries growing in a sunny clearing. The berries were past their prime, many overripe or beginning to mold, but they managed to find enough good ones to take the edge off their hunger. While they ate, Jack tried to take stock of their situation. They'd been in the woods for nearly 3 days now. How far had they traveled? 5 miles? 10? He had no way of knowing. All he knew was that they had seen no signs of civilization, no cabins, no hiking trails, not even old tire tracks or litter that would indicate human presence. "Jack?" Penny's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Do you think Mommy would be proud of us?" The question caught him off guard, a lump forming in his throat. "Yeah, Penny Pie. I think she'd be really proud of how brave you're being." Penny nodded solemnly. "I think she'd be proud of you too. You're taking good care of me, just like you promised her." Jack couldn't speak past the tightness in his chest. Instead, he squeezed Penny's hand, hoping she understood what he couldn't say, that he would keep that promise until his last breath if necessary. They moved on, the creek gradually widening into what could now be called a small river. The current looked dangerous, white water frothing around rocks and fallen trees. Jack kept Penny well away from the edge, acutely aware of the danger the rushing water presented. As the afternoon waned, Jack's condition worsened. The fever burned through him now, making each step an exercise in will. His vision blurred occasionally, dark spots dancing at the edges, and the pain in his arm had become a constant scream that he couldn't tune out. Still, he pushed on, knowing that stopping meant surrender, and surrender meant he couldn't think about that, wouldn't allow himself to consider failure. Jack. Penny's voice seemed to come from far away. Jack, you're walking funny. He realized he'd been weaving, his path alongside the river becoming erratic. With enormous effort, he focused on placing one foot in front of the other in a straight line. I'm fine, he said automatically, the lie becoming less convincing each time he repeated it. Just watching for slippery spots. Penny didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes, but she didn't argue, just stayed close to his side, occasionally steadying him when he swayed. The sun was beginning its descent when they reached the fallen pine. It lay across their path, a massive trunk perhaps 3 feet in diameter that had once stood tall at the river's edge before storms or rot had brought it down. Now it created a barrier they would have to climb over or navigate around. Jack stopped, assessing the obstacle through the feverish haze that clouded his thoughts. Going around would mean leaving the riverside, potentially getting lost in the dense forest. Going over meant climbing, which would be difficult with his injured arm. But the trunk wasn't too high off the ground, maybe 2 feet at its highest point. They could manage it. We need to climb over, he told Penny. I'll help you up first, then follow. He boosted Penny onto the trunk with his good arm, steadying her as she straddled the rough bark. But when it came time for him to follow, his strength failed him. His first attempt to pull himself up resulted in a white-hot flare of pain from his broken arm that left him gasping. His second attempt was no better. Jack. Penny's voice was high with fear. What's wrong? Nothing, he gasped, though sweat was pouring down his face despite the cool air. Just give me a minute. He took a deep breath, gathered what remained of his strength, and tried again. This time he managed to get his upper body onto the trunk, then swing his legs over with an awkward, painful movement that left him straddling the log beside Penny. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only sit there trying to breathe through the pain. Penny's hand found his, squeezing with surprising strength. You can do it, Jack, she said, echoing words he'd spoken to her countless times over the past 3 days. Just a little bit further. Her encouragement gave him the strength to continue. They scooted along the trunk until they reached the other side, then carefully lowered themselves to the ground. Jack's legs buckled as his feet touched earth, and he had to lean against the log for support. Penny looked at him with worried eyes. Maybe we should rest here for a while. Jack shook his head. Not yet. We need to find a good spot for tonight, somewhere sheltered. They continued along the riverside, Jack moving through sheer force of will now. The fever made everything seem distant and slightly unreal, as if he were watching himself and Penny from somewhere above. Only the pain in his arm anchored him to reality, a persistent flame that refused to be extinguished. As dusk approached, they finally found what Jack had been searching for. A massive pine tree with branches that swept low to the ground, creating a natural shelter beneath. It stood about 20 feet from the river's edge, on slightly higher ground that would stay dry even if the river rose further. We'll stay here tonight, Jack said, leading Penny beneath the pine's protective branches. The space under the tree was like a small room, the dense needles forming walls and ceiling that would help retain what little body heat they had. The ground was carpeted with years of fallen needles, creating a soft, relatively dry surface. Penny curled up on the pine needle bed, exhaustion evident in every line of her small body. Jack sat beside her, his back against the trunk, fighting to stay conscious. He knew he should try to find more food, should gather additional branches to improve their shelter, should do a dozen other things to improve their chances of survival. But he had nothing left, no reserves of strength to draw upon. Jack? Penny's voice was small, frightened. Are we going to die out here? The question pierced through the fever haze, bringing Jack back to full awareness. No, he said with every ounce of conviction he could muster. No, Penny Pie, we're not going to die. Someone will find us soon. Promise. Jack hesitated. He'd made so many promises to her. Promises that everything would be okay, that he'd keep her safe, that they'd find help. He wasn't sure how many more promises he could keep. I promise I'll do everything I can to get you home safe, he said finally. It was the most honest promise he could make. Penny seemed satisfied with that. She closed her eyes, her thumb finding its way to her mouth in a self-soothing gesture she'd mostly outgrown but still reverted to when frightened. Jack fought against the exhaustion pulling at him, determined to stay awake, to keep watch over Penny. But the fever was winning, drawing him down into a swirling darkness where time lost meaning and reality blurred with nightmare. In his delirium, he saw his mother standing at the edge of the clearing, her arms outstretched, her face filled with sorrow. He saw Raymond Mercer's cold eyes as he drove away, leaving them to die in the wilderness. He saw Diane, tears streaming down her face as she dialed a phone with trembling fingers. And through it all, he heard Penny's voice, sometimes close, sometimes distant, calling his name with increasing urgency. Jack? Jack, wake up. Please wake up. With monumental effort, Jack clawed his way back to consciousness. Penny was shaking his good arm, her face inches from his, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. I'm awake, he mumbled, his tongue feeling thick and uncooperative. What's wrong? You were making scary noises, she said, her lower lip trembling. And you're really hot, like the time I had the bad flu and had to go to the hospital. Jack tried to focus on her face, but it kept sliding in and out of clarity. I'm okay, he lied. Just tired. You're not okay. Penny's voice was surprisingly firm. We need to find help. Now. Jack knew she was right, but what could they do? It was nearly dark. They were in the middle of nowhere, and he could barely stand, let alone walk any further. In the morning, he said, trying to sound reassuring. We'll keep going in the morning. Penny looked at him doubtfully but didn't argue. She settled back down beside him, her small body pressed against his side. Despite his fever, Jack felt cold, a bone-deep chill that no amount of shared body heat could touch. As night fell completely, the forest around them came alive with sounds, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the calls of night birds, the continuous murmur of the river. Jack stared up at the bits of sky visible through the pine branches, catching glimpses of stars appearing one by one. Jack? Penny's voice was drowsy. Will you tell me about the magic house again? Sure, Penny Pie. His voice was a hoarse whisper now, each word an effort. The magic house is waiting for us. It's not far now. And when we get there, the front door will recognize us and swing open wide. He continued the familiar tale, embellishing it with new details drawn from the foggy reaches of his fever-addled mind. Penny fell asleep before he finished, her breathing deep and even against his side. Jack tried to stay awake, tried to maintain his vigil, but the fever pulled him down into darkness once more. His last conscious thought was a prayer, not for himself but for Penny, that someone would find her, that she wouldn't be alone, that his final promise wouldn't be broken. Miles away, in a small ranger station at the edge of the Green Mountain National Forest, a group gathered around a map spread out on a table. State police, forest rangers, and local search and rescue volunteers listened as a detective pointed to a logging road deep in the woods. According to Mrs. Mercer, this is approximately where her husband left the children 3 days ago, the detective said, his finger tapping a spot on the map. Since then, we believe they've been following this watershed system downstream. The boy apparently knows that water leads to civilization. Smart kid, one of the rangers commented. But that's a lot of ground to cover. And with the rain we've had, we'll find them, the detective said firmly. First light tomorrow, we'll have helicopters in the air and teams on the ground. Every available officer, every volunteer. These kids have been out there for 3 days with minimal supplies. Time is critical. In another room, Diane Mercer sat with her head in her hands, a barely touched cup of coffee on the table before her. The weight of her delayed action, her failure to call for help immediately, pressed down on her like a physical force. Please, she whispered to no one in particular. Please find them. Please let them be alive. Back in the forest, beneath the protective branches of the ancient pine, Jack Harrington burned with fever, his broken arm hot and swollen beneath its dirty bandage. Beside him, Penny slept the exhausted sleep of a child who had walked beyond her endurance, who had faced fear and hunger and cold with a courage beyond her years. And somewhere in the darkness, the beam of a flashlight swept through the trees as Michael Thornton, a local hunter checking his trail cameras before the coming storm, made his way along the riverbank. He hadn't heard about the missing children yet. He'd been deep in the woods since early morning. But he would soon become an unlikely hero in a story that would capture the hearts of an entire state. For now, though, he was simply a man walking through the forest, unaware that less than a mile ahead, 2 children huddled beneath a pine tree, one of them barely clinging to consciousness, both of them desperately in need of the help he could provide. The night deepened, stars wheeled overhead, and the river continued its journey toward the valley, carrying with it the promise of civilization and salvation. If only Jack could hold on long enough to reach it. Michael Thornton moved through the pre-dawn darkness with the easy confidence of a man who knew these woods like the lines on his own palm. At 52, he'd been hunting in this part of Vermont for over 4 decades, starting as a boy tagging along behind his father. The beam of his flashlight swept methodically across the forest floor, illuminating fallen leaves, exposed roots, and the occasional startled eyes of nocturnal creatures. He hadn't planned to be out quite this early, but the weather report had mentioned another storm front moving in by midday, and he wanted to check his trail cameras before the rain hit. The cameras were part of a personal project, tracking the movements of a particularly impressive 10-point buck he'd spotted last season but never managed to get a clear shot at. Hunting season was still a few weeks away, but Michael believed in thorough preparation. The river had risen considerably with the recent rainfall, its usually gentle burble now a constant rush that provided a backdrop to the pre-dawn chorus of the forest. Michael paused on a small rise, taking a swig from his thermos of coffee and surveying the terrain ahead. The beam of his flashlight caught something unusual, a faint path of disturbed undergrowth leading away from the river. Something or someone had passed this way recently. A deer perhaps, or maybe a bear. But the trail seemed too narrow, too direct. And there was something about it that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Michael had been a volunteer with the local search and rescue team for nearly 15 years. Though he hadn't been called out recently, he had a searcher's eye for anomalies in the landscape, the small signs that indicated human presence in places where humans typically didn't venture. He decided to follow the trail, curiosity drawing him forward. The path led toward a massive pine tree, standing about 20 yards from the river's edge. As he approached, his light caught a flash of color beneath the sweeping branches, something that didn't belong in the natural palette of the forest. Michael moved closer, pushing aside the low-hanging pine boughs with one hand while directing his flashlight beam into the space beneath. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. 2 children lay curled together on a bed of pine needles. A little girl, no more than 4 or 5, slept with her thumb in her mouth, wrapped in what appeared to be a denim jacket several sizes too large for her. Beside her, a boy who looked to be around 7 or 8 sat propped against the trunk of the pine. His eyes closed, his face flushed with an unnatural color that was visible even in the beam of the flashlight. For a moment, Michael stood frozen in shock. The last thing he'd expected to find deep in these woods was a pair of children, clearly alone and in distress. Then training and instinct took over. He knelt down, still keeping some distance to avoid frightening them. "Hey there," he called softly. "Can you hear me?" The boy's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with fever. His body tensed immediately, one arm, the right one, moving protectively in front of the still sleeping girl. "It's okay," Michael said, keeping his voice low and gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Michael. I'm a hunter. I live near here. Can you tell me your name?" The boy stared at him, confusion and fear warring on his face. "Jack," he finally whispered, his voice hoarse and barely audible over the sound of the river. "My name's Jack." "Hi, Jack. Is that your sister?" Michael gestured toward the sleeping child. Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. "Penny. Her name's Penny. Don't wake her yet. She's really tired." Michael noticed how Jack kept his left arm curled against his body, wrapped in what looked like a filthy dishcloth. Even in the dim light, he could see the unnatural swelling, the angry redness of infection. "Jack, what happened to your arm?" he asked, already suspecting the answer but needing confirmation. "It's broken," Jack said matter-of-factly, as if discussing something as mundane as the weather. "Mr. Raymond broke it." The simple statement, delivered with such resignation, made Michael's chest tighten with anger. But he kept his expression neutral, knowing the boy would be watching for any reaction. "And who is Mr. Raymond?" "Our foster father. He left us here." Jack's eyes darted around, suddenly more alert despite the fever. "He's not coming back. He said we were garbage. That garbage belongs in the woods." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He'd heard many stories in his years with search and rescue. People stranded after getting lost, injuries sustained during hikes or climbs gone wrong, but nothing like this. Nothing so deliberately cruel, so calculated to cause harm to children. "But I'm not garbage," Jack continued, his voice stronger now, a spark of defiance cutting through the fever haze. "Penny's not garbage. I promised Mom I'd always keep her safe." "You did keep her safe, Jack," Michael said, his throat tight with emotion. "You did an incredible job. But now I'm going to help you, okay? I'm going to call for people who can get you and Penny out of these woods and to a hospital." Jack seemed to consider this, his eyes never leaving Michael's face as if searching for any sign of deception. Finally, he gave a small nod. "My arm hurts real bad," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him greatly. "And I think I have a fever, like when Penny had the flu." "I'm sure you do," Michael said. Already reaching for the satellite phone, he carried on longer excursions into the woods. "But we're going to get you help very soon." As he dialed 911, Michael kept his eyes on the children. The little girl, Penny, was beginning to stir, perhaps roused by their quiet conversation. Jack immediately turned his attention to her, whispering reassurances that Michael couldn't quite catch, but whose intent was clear. Even in his compromised state, the boy's first priority was comforting his sister. The 911 dispatcher answered, and Michael quickly explained the situation, providing as precise coordinates as he could based on his GPS unit. The dispatcher confirmed what he already suspected. These were the missing children that local authorities had been searching for since yesterday afternoon. "Search teams are already being mobilized," the dispatcher informed him. "Can you stay with the children until help arrives?" "Absolutely. I have emergency supplies, water, some food, a first aid kit, and extra clothing. I'll make them as comfortable as possible. Medical personnel will be dispatched immediately." "Can you describe the boy's condition in more detail?" Michael gave a thorough assessment of what he could observe: Jack's obvious fever, the swollen arm that was almost certainly infected, the signs of dehydration and exposure. He kept his voice low, but Jack was watching him with an unsettling intensity, clearly aware that he was being discussed. By the time Michael ended the call, Penny was fully awake, her blue eyes wide with fear as she took in the stranger kneeling at the edge of their shelter. She immediately pressed closer to Jack, one small hand clutching his shirt. "It's okay, Penny Pie," Jack murmured. "This is Mr. Michael. He's going to help us." Michael was struck by the trust implicit in those words. After what these children had experienced, abandoned by their foster father, struggling to survive for days in the wilderness, Jack's willingness to believe in the kindness of another adult was nothing short of remarkable. "Hi, Penny," Michael said, keeping his voice gentle. "I bet you're hungry and thirsty, aren't you?" I have some water and snacks in my backpack. He moved slowly, telegraphing his actions as he unslung his backpack and withdrew a water bottle and several granola bars. He handed them to Jack first, letting the boy perform the familiar role of provider by giving them to his sister. Penny took the granola bar with a combination of eagerness and suspicion, her eyes darting between Michael and Jack as if seeking permission. When Jack nodded, she tore into the wrapper, devouring the bar with the desperate hunger of a child who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Help is on the way, Michael told them as they ate and drank. There are lots of people looking for you. They'll be here soon to take you somewhere warm and safe. Are they going to send us back to Mr. Raymond? Penny asked, her voice small and frightened. No, Michael said firmly, not caring if it was a promise he could technically keep. You will never have to go back to him. Ever. This seemed to satisfy both children. Jack visibly relaxed, some of the tension leaving his thin shoulders. But the relief was short-lived as another wave of fever clearly hit him. His eyes lost focus, and he swayed slightly where he sat. Michael knew he needed to take more direct action. The boy's condition was deteriorating, and while help was on the way, it might not arrive quickly enough. The infection in the broken arm needed immediate attention. Jack, he said, moving closer, I'd like to look at your arm if that's okay. I have a first aid kit and I've had some training. I might be able to make it feel a little better until the doctors get here. Jack hesitated, then gave a small nod. Okay. Moving carefully, Michael gently unwrapped the filthy dishcloth from around Jack's forearm. What he found beneath made him have to work hard to keep his expression neutral. The arm was grossly swollen, the skin hot and tight with infection. There was an obvious deformity where the bones had been broken and then left to heal improperly. You've been carrying this injury for a while, Michael said, keeping his voice conversational as he rummaged in his first aid kit for alcohol wipes and clean gauze. 3 days before we came to the woods, Jack confirmed. Mr. Raymond kicked me when I tried to stop him from hurting their dog. Again, the matter-of-fact delivery of such a horrific statement made Michael's chest tighten with anger. But he focused on the task at hand, gently cleaning around the worst of the infection, avoiding direct pressure on the obviously broken bones. This is going to sting, he warned before applying antiseptic to the area. Jack flinched but made no sound, his jaw clenched tight against the pain. Michael wrapped the arm loosely in clean gauze, creating a makeshift sling from a bandana to take some of the pressure off. That should feel a little better, he said when he was done. The most important thing now is to get you to a hospital where they can give you medicine for the infection and fix your arm properly. Jack touched the clean bandage with cautious fingers. It does feel better. Thank you. You're welcome. Michael turned his attention to Penny, giving her a gentle once-over. She showed no obvious injuries beyond minor scrapes and scratches, but she was clearly exhausted and somewhat dehydrated. How about you, Penny? Are you hurt anywhere? She shook her head, then held up her palm to show a small cut. Just here. I fell yesterday. May I? Michael asked, and when she nodded, he gently cleaned and bandaged the small wound. There. Good as new. With immediate medical concerns addressed as best he could manage in the field, Michael turned to making the children more comfortable. He pulled emergency thermal blankets from his pack, wrapping one around each child. From a small stuff sack, he produced a set of hand warmers, activating them with a squeeze and tucked them into the blankets. These will help keep you warm, he explained. They're like little heaters. Penny's eyes widened as the packet began to warm in her hands. It's magic. Kind of, Michael agreed with a smile. Special chemicals that make heat when they mix together. As they waited for rescue, Michael kept the children engaged, asking questions about their favorite foods and colors, telling carefully edited stories about animals he'd encountered in the woods. He was deliberately avoiding asking more about their situation. That would be for the professionals. His job now was simply to keep them calm and stable until help arrived. Jack's condition continued to be worrisome. Despite the clean bandage and the warmth of the thermal blanket, his fever seemed to be worsening. He would respond to direct questions, but his answers became increasingly disjointed, and twice Michael had to steady him when he began to list to one side. Penny noticed. Her small face creased with worry. "Jack's really sick," she whispered to Michael, as if sharing a secret. "He carried me yesterday when I couldn't walk anymore, even though his arm hurt." The simple statement painted a vivid picture for Michael. This small, injured boy somehow finding the strength to carry his sister through miles of difficult terrain, all while suffering from a broken arm and developing infection. The courage it must have taken was almost beyond comprehension. "Your brother is very brave," Michael told her. "And so are you." Dawn was breaking now, pale light filtering through the pine branches. With it came the distant but unmistakable sound of a helicopter. Michael immediately pulled a bright orange emergency flag from his pack and stood. "I'm going to go a little way into that clearing," he told the children, pointing to an open space about 50 yards away. "I need to signal the helicopter so they can find us. I'll be right back, I promise." Jack gave a feeble nod, and Penny looked anxious but didn't protest. Michael hurried to the clearing, unfurling the orange flag and waving it in broad sweeps above his head. The helicopter appeared moments later, circling once before hovering directly overhead. A crewman leaned out, spotting Michael and giving a thumbs up to indicate they'd been seen. The helicopter couldn't land in the dense forest, but it circled overhead, clearly marking their position for the ground teams that must be en route. Michael returned to the children, finding Penny pressed tightly against Jack's side, her hands covering her ears against the noise of the rotors. "That's our rescue helicopter," Michael explained, kneeling beside them again. "They're letting the people on the ground know exactly where we are. The rescue team will be here very soon." As if on cue, shouts could be heard in the distance, voices calling back and forth as the search team made their way along the river toward their position. Michael answered with a loud halloo, guiding them in. Within minutes, the first rescuers broke through the trees, 2 paramedics and a state police officer, all wearing the distinctive orange vests of the search and rescue team. They moved quickly to the children, the paramedics immediately beginning to assess Jack's condition while the officer conferred quietly with Michael. "Diane Mercer confessed yesterday afternoon," the officer explained in hushed tones. "Said her husband took the kids on a special trip and came back without them, claiming he'd left them with a family that would find them in the woods. She was too afraid of him to call immediately, but when he took off with their savings, she finally contacted us." "What kind of monster dumps children in the wilderness?" Michael asked, the anger he'd been suppressing finally showing through. "The kind we're going to catch," the officer assured him grimly. "There's an APB out for Raymond Mercer across 3 states. He won't get far." Their conversation was interrupted by activity from the paramedics. One was speaking urgently into a radio, requesting immediate evacuation for the boy. Suspected sepsis from untreated compound fracture. Temperature 104.2. Tachycardic. Need immediate transport to Burlington Medical. Events began to move quickly. More rescue personnel arrived, including 2 wilderness EMTs with a specialized stretcher designed for rough terrain evacuation. Jack was carefully transferred onto it, the paramedics starting an IV line to begin administering fluids and antibiotics. Through it all, Penny refused to leave her brother's side, becoming increasingly distressed when one of the EMTs tried to lead her away to be examined separately. "No, I need to stay with Jack. He needs me," she cried, tears streaming down her face. Jack, despite his semi-conscious state, seemed to sense her distress. His right hand moved restlessly on the stretcher, searching. "Penny?" he called, his voice weak but urgent. Michael stepped in, kneeling beside the stretcher. "Jack, they need to take you to the hospital right away. Penny will be right behind you, I promise. But you need to go first because your arm needs special medicine." Jack's fever-bright eyes found Michael's. "You'll stay with her? Until she comes to the hospital too?" "I will," Michael promised without hesitation. "I won't leave her side until she's with you again." This seemed to satisfy Jack, though whether he truly comprehended in his fevered state was unclear. The EMTs seized the moment to begin moving, carefully maneuvering the stretcher through the trees toward a clearing large enough for the helicopter to lower a rescue basket. Michael lifted Penny into his arms, feeling her small body trembling as she watched her brother being carried away. "They're going to make him better," he assured her. "And we'll follow just as soon as the doctor checks you too. Okay?" Penny nodded against his shoulder, her arms tight around his neck. "Promise. I promise." The extraction went as smoothly as could be expected in the difficult terrain. Jack was airlifted first, the helicopter disappearing toward Burlington with its precious cargo and a paramedic who continued treatment during transit. Penny, after a brief examination that found her suffering from mild dehydration and exhaustion but otherwise remarkably healthy, was loaded into a waiting ambulance with Michael at her side, keeping his promise to stay with her. As the ambulance wound its way out of the forest on rough service roads, Penny finally surrendered to the exhaustion she'd been fighting. She fell asleep against Michael's side, her small hand still clutching his as if afraid he might disappear if she let go. Looking down at her, Michael felt a fierce surge of protectiveness. He'd gone into the woods that morning expecting nothing more exciting than checking his trail cameras. Instead, he'd become entangled in the lives of these two remarkable children who had survived against incredible odds. "We've got a police escort meeting us at the main road," the EMT in the back of the ambulance told him quietly. "They'll get us to Burlington Medical in record time." Michael nodded, his hand gently stroking Penny's tangled hair. "How's the boy, Jack? Any word?" "First report from the chopper says he's holding steady. They're pushing antibiotics and fluids, keeping his temperature from climbing higher. Kid's a fighter." "You have no idea," Michael murmured, thinking of what these children had endured. Not just the 3 days in the wilderness, but the abuse that had preceded it, the broken arm inflicted by someone who should have been their protector. By mid-morning, they were pulling up to the emergency entrance of Burlington Medical Center, where a team of medical personnel waited to receive Penny. Despite his status as a non-relative, Michael was allowed to stay with her due to her extreme distress whenever anyone suggested he leave. "Jack," she kept saying, looking around anxiously as they wheeled her into a treatment room. "Where's Jack?" "He's here in the hospital," a kind-faced nurse assured her. "The doctors are fixing his arm and giving him medicine. As soon as they're done, you can see him." This seemed to calm her somewhat, though she still insisted on holding Michael's hand throughout her examination. The doctor, a pediatric specialist named Dr. Chun, was gentle and patient, explaining each step of the examination before proceeding. "You're a very brave girl, Penny," Dr. Chun said when she'd finished. "You're a little dehydrated, which means you need more water in your body, and you have some scratches and bruises, but overall, you're in remarkably good shape for someone who spent 3 days in the woods." "Jack took care of me," Penny said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. "Well, now it's our turn to take care of both of you," Dr. Chun replied with a smile. "We're going to start an IV. That's a small tube that will give your body the fluids it needs, and then you can rest. When you wake up, maybe you can see your brother." The mention of seeing Jack was enough to secure Penny's cooperation with the IV placement and the other minor medical interventions required. Soon she was settled in a pediatric room, clean and dressed in hospital pajamas decorated with cartoon animals, her eyes growing heavy as the combination of a full stomach, warmth, and medication began to take effect. "Don't leave," she murmured to Michael as she drifted towards sleep. "Promise. I promise," he said again, settling into the chair beside her bed. "I'll be right here." As Penny slept, Michael was joined by a social worker named Andrea Lewis, who explained that she'd been assigned to the children's case on an emergency basis. "We've been in contact with their previous social worker," she told Michael quietly. "The children have been in foster care for just over 2 years, since their mother's death from an overdose. They've been moved several times due to various issues with placements. The Mercers were their 5th foster home. And no one noticed anything wrong?" Michael couldn't keep the edge from his voice. Andrea sighed, looking genuinely troubled. "The Mercers passed all the standard screenings. Raymond Mercer had no criminal record, good references, stable employment. They had a home visit just 2 weeks ago, and everything seemed fine. The children didn't report any problems. Jack said his arm was broken 3 days before they were abandoned, Michael pointed out. That's a pretty big problem to miss. According to Diane Mercer's statement, Raymond convinced her to keep the injury hidden, to tell the boy it was just a sprain. She's cooperating fully now, providing details about Raymond's behavior and his statements after abandoning the children. Andrea's expression hardened slightly. She'll likely face charges for failing to seek medical attention for Jack and for not reporting the abandonment immediately, though her cooperation may mitigate the sentence. And Raymond, still at large, but it's just a matter of time. His photo and description have been distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout the Northeast. He used a credit card in Albany yesterday, so we know he's heading south. Their conversation was interrupted by a doctor entering the room, his scrubs identifying him as a member of the surgical team. He glanced at the sleeping Penny before addressing them in a low voice. I'm Dr. Patel, one of the orthopedic surgeons who worked on Jack Harrington. I understand you're the hunter who found them. This was directed at Michael, who nodded. I wanted to update you, since you've been with the little girl. Jack is out of surgery. We had to reset the broken bones, a radius and ulna fracture, and clean out a significant infection. He's receiving high-dose antibiotics and will remain in the PICU for at least 24 to 48 hours for monitoring. But he'll be okay? Michael asked, voicing the question that mattered most. Dr. Patel's expression was cautiously optimistic. Barring complications, yes. He's young, which works in his favor. The infection was severe, but we caught it before it progressed to systemic sepsis. He'll need several weeks in a cast, possibly some physical therapy afterward, but we expect a full recovery. The relief Michael felt was profound, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. Can Penny see him when she wakes up? She's been incredibly worried. Brief visits should be possible once he's fully awake. Dr. Patel agreed. I'll make a note in his chart. It might actually help his recovery to see that his sister is safe and well. After the doctor left, Michael found himself reluctant to leave, even though Penny was sleeping peacefully and would likely continue to do so for several hours. Something about these children had gotten under his skin, had awakened a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. You've gone above and beyond, Andrea told him, seeming to sense his thoughts. Most people would have called for help and moved on once professionals arrived. Instead, you've stayed with them, provided comfort and stability during a traumatic time. Michael shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done the same. No, Andrea said firmly. Not everyone would have. Trust me, I've been in social work for 15 years. What you've done matters. Before Michael could respond, a soft knock at the door heralded the arrival of a police detective, who introduced himself as Detective Wilson. He asked to speak with Michael about finding the children, and they stepped into the hallway to avoid disturbing Penny. Michael provided a detailed account of how he discovered Jack and Penny, including the boys' statements about Raymond Mercer breaking his arm and abandoning them in the woods. The detective took careful notes, occasionally asking for clarification on specific points. This will be extremely helpful for building the case against Mercer, Detective Wilson said when Michael had finished. The children's testimony will be crucial as well, but having an adult witness to their condition and Jack's statements immediately upon rescue adds significant weight. Have you caught him yet? Michael asked. Not yet, but we're close. He used a credit card again an hour ago, at a gas station just outside of Hartford, Connecticut. Local police have been alerted, and all transportation hubs are being monitored. It's only a matter of time. As if on cue, the detective's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, a smile spreading across his face. And it appears that time is now. Mercer was just apprehended by Connecticut State Police on I-91. He was heading for the New York border. The news should have brought satisfaction, but Michael found himself thinking only of the two children whose lives had been forever altered by this man's cruelty. Good, he said simply. I hope he goes away for a very long time. With the charges he's facing, child endangerment, child abuse, attempted murder, it's virtually certain, the detective assured him. When the detective had gone, Michael returned to Penny's room, resuming his seat beside her bed. Andrea had left as well, promising to return later to discuss next steps for the children's care. For now, though, it was just Michael and the sleeping child, the steady beep of the IV pump marking the passage of time. Hours passed. Nurses came and went, checking Penny's vitals, adjusting her IV. Michael dozed occasionally in the uncomfortable chair but never left, true to his promise. It was late afternoon when Penny finally stirred, her eyes blinking open with momentary confusion before focusing on Michael's face. "You stayed," she said, sounding faintly surprised despite his promise. "Of course I did." Michael leaned forward, smiling at her. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Penny pushed herself to a sitting position, looking around the bright pediatric room with its colorful murals and child-friendly equipment. "Where's Jack? Is he okay?" "He is," Michael assured her. "The doctors fixed his arm and gave him medicine for the infection. He's resting now just like you were. And guess what? The doctor said you might be able to visit him soon." Penny's face lit up, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Really? When?" "Let me check with the nurse," Michael suggested, pressing the call button beside her bed. "And maybe we can find you something to eat too. I bet you're hungry." The nurse who responded confirmed that Penny could visit her brother once she'd eaten, and Dr. Chun had checked her again. She brought a tray of food, simple, easily digestible items like applesauce, toast, and diluted juice, that Penny attacked with the enthusiasm of a child who had survived on foraged berries and creek water for 3 days. Dr. Chun arrived as Penny was finishing her meal, conducting a quick examination, and pronounced herself satisfied with Penny's improvement. "Your brother is awake and asking for you," she told Penny with a smile. "Would you like to see him now?" Penny nodded eagerly, already pushing aside her tray and attempting to climb out of bed. Dr. Chun laughed gently, helping her with the IV pole. "Just a short visit," the doctor cautioned. "Jack needs lots of rest to get better. But I think seeing you will be the best medicine for him right now." They made their way to the pediatric intensive care unit, where Jack had been moved after surgery. Before entering, Dr. Chun knelt to Penny's level. "Your brother has a lot of tubes and machines helping him get better," she explained gently. "It might look a little scary, but everything is there to help him. His arm is in a special cast to hold the bones in place while they heal, and he has medicine going into his arm through an IV, just like you do." Penny nodded, her expression serious. "I won't be scared. I just want to see Jack." The scene inside the PICA room was indeed intimidating. Jack lying in a hospital bed that seemed too large for his small frame. His left arm encased in a bright blue cast and elevated on a pillow, multiple IV lines running into his right arm, monitors beeping steadily beside him. But none of that seemed to matter to Penny, who had eyes only for her brother's face. "Jack!" she called, hurrying forward as quickly as her IV pole would allow. Jack's eyes, which had been closed, opened immediately at the sound of her voice. His face was still flushed with the remnants of fever, but his gaze was clearer now, the worst of the infection beaten back by powerful antibiotics. "Penny Pie," he said, his voice weak but filled with relief. "You're okay. Aha, and you're getting better too. The doctor fixed your arm." Jack's eyes moved from Penny to Michael, who stood behind her, and then to Dr. Chun. "Thank you," he said simply, the two words carrying the weight of everything he couldn't articulate. "You did an amazing job taking care of your sister, Jack," Dr. Chun told him. "But now it's our turn to take care of both of you." Jack seemed to consider this, his gaze returning to Penny as if assuring himself that she was truly safe and well. Then he looked back at Michael. "You kept your promise," he said. "You stayed with her." "I did," Michael confirmed, moved by the boy's concern for his sister even in his own distress. "And I'll keep staying as long as you both need me to." It was a spontaneous offer, one Michael hadn't planned to make but found he meant with absolute sincerity. These children, who had survived so much with so little help, had awakened something in him, a desire to protect, to provide the stability they so desperately deserved. Jack smiled faintly, clearly exhausted by even this brief interaction. Dr. Chun noted his fatigue and gently suggested that Penny should let her brother rest. You can visit again tomorrow, she promised. Jack needs to sleep now so the medicine can help him get better faster. Penny was reluctant to leave but eventually agreed when Jack himself told her to go. I'll see you tomorrow, Penny Pie, he assured her. I'm not going anywhere. As they turned to leave, Jack called out once more. Mr. Michael? Michael paused, turning back. Yes, Jack. Did they catch him? Mr. Raymond? The question hung in the air, loaded with all the fear and uncertainty the children had lived with. Michael exchanged a glance with Dr. Chun, who gave a small nod. Yes, Michael said firmly. They caught him. He's in jail and he's going to stay there for a very long time. He can never hurt you or Penny again. Jack digested this information, his expression unreadable. Then he gave a single, decisive nod, as if closing a chapter. Good, he said, and closed his eyes, surrendering to the healing sleep his body so desperately needed. Back in Penny's room, Michael found Andrea Lewis waiting with news. I've been making calls about the children's case, she explained once Penny was settled back in bed with a coloring book and crayons provided by a volunteer. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, if you have a moment. They stepped into the hallway, Andrea's expression both serious and hopeful. The children's previous placements were all foster homes without the intention to adopt, she began. As is often the case with older children and sibling groups, finding a permanent placement has been challenging. But given the extraordinary circumstances and the media attention this case has received, I've been inundated with calls from potential foster families willing to take both children, including several who are open to adoption. Michael felt a curious mix of emotions at this news. Relief that the children would have options, but also an unexpected pang at the thought of them moving on, away from him. That's good, he said, trying to focus on what was best for Jack and Penny rather than his own strange reluctance to let them go. They deserve a stable home. Andrea studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. You've formed a bond with these children, she observed, especially with Penny. It's not unusual in rescue situations, particularly ones as emotionally charged as this. Michael shifted uncomfortably, and used to having his feelings so accurately read by a stranger. They're special kids. They are, Andrea agreed, which is why I want to suggest something that might seem unorthodox. Would you consider becoming a temporary foster placement for them once they're released from the hospital? The question caught Michael completely off guard. Me? But I'm not. You're not a certified foster parent, no, Andrea acknowledged. But there are provisions for emergency kinship placements in extraordinary circumstances, which these certainly qualify as. We could expedite the process, conduct the necessary home study and background checks on an accelerated timeline. But I'm not family, Michael pointed out, still struggling to process the suggestion. You're the closest thing these children have to a trusted adult figure right now, Andrea countered. You found them, you stayed with them through the rescue and hospital admission. You've kept your promises to them. That matters, especially to children who have experienced the kind of betrayal they have. Michael's mind raced, considering the implications. He lived alone in a modest 3-bedroom house at the edge of town, left to him by his parents. He'd been a bachelor all his life, his job as a wildlife consultant for the state allowing him a flexible schedule but modest income. He had no experience with children beyond occasionally spending time with his nieces and nephews. And yet, the image of Jack and Penny huddled beneath that pine tree, having survived against impossible odds through nothing but Jack's determination and courage, had etched itself into Michael's heart. The way Penny's small hand had sought his for comfort, the way Jack had fought to stay conscious until he knew his sister was safe. These things had changed something fundamental within him. I'd need to think about it, he said finally. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Andrea nodded, seemingly pleased rather than disappointed by his caution. Of course. Take the time you need. The children will be in the hospital for at least a few more days. Jack longer than Penny, most likely. But I wanted to present the option now, so we can begin the process if you decide it's something you're willing to consider. Before Michael could respond further, a nurse approached with an update on Jack's condition. His fever's broken, she reported with a smile. The antibiotics are working. Dr. Patel says he's cautiously optimistic about a full recovery, though it will take time. The news sent a wave of relief through Michael. He thanked the nurse, then turned back to Andrea. I'd like to visit him, if that's allowed. Of course. I'll stay with Penny. Andrea gestured toward the door of the little girl's room, where Penny could be seen through the window, still focused on her coloring. She seems quite comfortable with the activities the child life specialist brought. Michael made his way back to the PICU, where he found Jack awake, his color markedly improved from their earlier visit. The boy's eyes tracked to him immediately as he entered. Mr. Michael, Jack said, a faint smile lifting the corners of his mouth. You came back. I did, Michael confirmed, moving to stand beside the bed. I hear you're feeling better. Jack nodded slightly, careful not to disturb the various tubes and wires connected to him. The medicine is helping. My arm doesn't hurt as much now. That's good to hear. There was a moment of silence, not uncomfortable but full of unspoken emotions. Then Jack spoke again, his voice smaller, more vulnerable than before. What's going to happen to us now? To me and Penny? The question hit Michael with surprising force. Of course the boy would be concerned about their future, would be wondering what new uncertainty awaited them after the hospital. Despite all they'd been through, Jack was still thinking ahead, still focused on protecting his sister. Well, Michael said, choosing his words carefully, there are a lot of people who want to help you and Penny. Ms. Lewis, the social worker you met earlier, is looking at options for where you'll go when you leave the hospital. Jack's expression tightened slightly, a shadow of fear crossing his face. Will they keep us together? Me and Penny? Absolutely, Michael assured him with a conviction he felt down to his bones. No one is going to separate you two. Not after everything you've been through together. Some of the tension left Jack's body at this promise. Good, he said simply. Then, after a moment, I like Ms. Lewis. She doesn't talk to us like we're babies. She seems like a good person, Michael agreed. She really wants to find the best place for you both. Another silence fell, this one more contemplative. Jack seemed to be considering something, his young face serious beyond his years. Mr. Michael, he finally said, can I ask you something? Of course. Anything. Do you have kids? The question was unexpected, and Michael found himself smiling at the directness of it. No, I don't. I never got married or had a family of my own. Oh, Jack absorbed this information, his expression thoughtful. But you're good with kids. You knew how to make Penny feel better when she was scared. Well, thank you, Michael said, touched by the observation. I have nieces and nephews, my sister's children, that I spend time with, and I've worked with the search and rescue team for many years, helping people who are lost or hurt. Jack nodded as if this made perfect sense. You'd be a good dad, he stated with the simple certainty of a child. The words landed with unexpected weight. Before Michael could formulate a response, Jack continued, his voice taking on a tentative quality. Ms. Lewis said we might go to a new foster home when we leave the hospital. One where people want to adopt kids. That's one possibility, Michael acknowledged, watching the boy carefully. What if? Jack hesitated, then seemed to gather his courage. What if we stayed with you instead, just until they find us a forever home? The question, so close to what Andrea had proposed just minutes earlier, left Michael momentarily speechless. That this child, who had every reason to distrust adults after what he'd endured, would ask to stay with him was both humbling and profoundly moving. Is that something you'd want? Michael asked when he found his voice again. To stay with me for a while? Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. Penny likes you, and you kept your promise to stay with her. And you found us in the woods when nobody else could. He paused, then added with that same direct simplicity. I trust you. 3 simple words that carried the weight of a lifetime. Michael felt something shift inside him, a decision crystallizing where before there had been only uncertainty. "I'd need to talk to Ms. Lewis about it," he said carefully. "There are rules about these things, procedures that have to be followed. But if it's possible, yes, I'd like for you and Penny to stay with me while you're recovering." A smile, small but genuine, spread across Jack's face. "Really? Really?" Michael confirmed, finding that the idea, rather than frightening him as it perhaps should have, filled him with a sense of rightness. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, you need to focus on getting better." Jack nodded, clearly satisfied with this answer. "I will. The doctor said if I rest and take all the medicine, I might go home next week." Home. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a nurse, coming to check Jack's vitals and administer the next round of antibiotics. Michael used the opportunity to take his leave, promising to return later with Penny for another brief visit if the doctors allowed it. As he walked back toward Penny's room, his mind was already racing through the practical considerations, the spare bedrooms that would need to be furnished, the arrangements he'd need to make with his work, the countless adjustments that would be required to welcome 2 traumatized children into his life, even temporarily. Yet underlying all these thoughts was a sense of certainty that had been missing from his life for longer than he cared to admit. For years, he'd lived alone, his days filled with meaningful work, but his home empty of the deeper connections that gave life its fullest meaning. Now, in the most unexpected way imaginable, he'd been offered a chance to change that. He found Andrea still sitting with Penny, the 2 of them engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation about the relative merits of purple versus blue crayons for coloring the sky. The social worker looked up as he entered, a question in her eyes. "Can we talk?" Michael asked quietly. "I've made a decision." Andrea nodded, excusing herself to Penny with a promise to continue their artistic debate later. In the hallway, Michael didn't waste time with preamble. "I want to do it," he said simply. "I want to provide a home for Jack and Penny, at least temporarily. What do we need to do to make that happen?" Andrea's face broke into a genuine smile. "I had a feeling you might say that. Jack asked me about the possibility just before you arrived to take Penny to see him. He asked me too just now," Michael admitted. "That's what made up my mind." "Then let's get started," Andrea said, her professional demeanor returning though the warmth remained in her eyes. "We'll need to conduct an expedited home study, background checks, and complete some emergency certification training. It's an accelerated process, but still thorough." As Andrea outlined the steps that would follow, Michael felt a curious mixture of nervousness and anticipation. His life was about to change dramatically, in ways he couldn't fully anticipate. There would be challenges, certainly, helping 2 traumatized children heal, navigating the foster care system, potentially preparing them for an eventual transition to a permanent adoptive home. But there would also be moments of joy, of connection, of the simple human comfort that comes from being needed and from meeting that need with steady presence. Already, he could envision evenings reading stories, weekends exploring the gentler parts of the forest that had nearly claimed their lives, holidays filled with new traditions created together. Whether this arrangement lasted weeks, months, or evolved into something more permanent, Michael knew with certainty that he was making the right choice. For Jack and Penny, yes, but also for himself. Later that evening, after completing the initial paperwork with Andrea and making arrangements to begin the expedited certification process the following day, Michael returned to Penny's room to find her sitting up in bed, engaged in a serious conversation with a stuffed bear that one of the nurses had brought her. "Mr. Bear says he's hungry," she informed Michael gravely as he entered. "But the nurse said dinner isn't until 6 o'clock. "Well, that is a problem," Michael agreed, settling into the chair beside her bed. "Perhaps Mr. Bear could have a snack to tide him over? I happen to have some crackers in my backpack." Penny's face lit up. "Yes, please. Mr. Bear would like that very much." As Michael retrieved the crackers from his pack, he thought about how quickly children could adapt, finding moments of normality and even joy in the midst of trauma. Penny, despite everything she'd endured, was still capable of imaginative play, of caring for a stuffed animal, of accepting kindness from those around her. Jack, too, had shown remarkable resilience. His unwavering protection of his sister, his determination to survive against overwhelming odds, his capacity to trust despite having that trust shattered by those meant to care for him. These were children worth fighting for, worth rearranging a life for. And Michael, somewhat to his own surprise, found himself eager to begin. "Penny," he said as she carefully fed a cracker to Mr. Bear, "I was wondering how you'd feel about coming to stay at my house when the doctors say you can leave the hospital. You and Jack, once he's well enough." Penny looked up at him, her blue eyes wide with surprise and a cautious hope. "Your house? Like, to live there?" "For a while, yes," Michael confirmed. "I have 2 empty bedrooms that are just waiting for someone to use them, and a backyard with a big oak tree that would be perfect for a swing." "A swing," Penny repeated, clearly captivated by this detail. "Like at a park?" "Exactly like that. And there's a creek nearby, a safe one with a little wooden bridge, where we could look for frogs in the summer." Penny considered this, her young face surprisingly thoughtful. "Would Jack have his own room too?" "He would," Michael assured her. "Right next to yours. And you could decorate them however you like. Choose the colors for the walls, pick out bedspreads, all of that." Another careful consideration, then the question that revealed where her true concerns lay. "Would you be there too? All the time?" "I would," Michael promised. "Every day and every night. I work from home most days, so I'd be there when you woke up in the morning and when you went to bed at night." This seemed to satisfy her most pressing concern. "And no one would hurt Jack again? Or take us to the woods?" The question broke Michael's heart even as it strengthened his resolve. "No, Penny. No one will ever hurt either of you in my home. And the only times we'd go to the woods would be together, for fun things like picnics or looking for interesting rocks or watching birds. And we'd always come back home afterward." Penny nodded solemnly, as if committing this promise to memory. Then she extended Mr. Bear toward Michael. "Mr. Bear says yes," she announced. "And I say yes too." Michael accepted the stuffed animal with appropriate gravity. "Thank you, Mr. Bear. And thank you, Penny. I think we're going to be just fine together." As he said the words, he realized he believed them completely. The road ahead would not be without its challenges, but they would face them together. Michael, Jack, Penny, and Mr. Bear too, apparently. A makeshift family forged in the most unlikely of circumstances, bound by shared experience and growing trust. In the PICU, Jack Harrington slept peacefully for the first time in days, his broken arm properly set and healing, the infection retreating before the onslaught of modern medicine. In the pediatric ward, Penny Harrington fed crackers to a stuffed bear and contemplated a future that included swings and frogs and safety. And Michael Thornton, who had gone into the woods that morning as a solitary hunter and would emerge from this experience as something entirely different, began mentally transforming his house into a home for 2 children who had carried the weight of silence for far too long. Raymond Mercer sat in a holding cell in a Connecticut State Police barracks, his face impassive as charges were read that would ensure he spent decades behind bars. Diane Mercer cooperated with investigators, providing evidence against her husband while facing her own, lesser charges for her failure to act sooner. And somewhere, perhaps, the spirit of a young mother who had loved her children even as addiction pulled her away from them found peace in knowing that her son had kept his promise to protect his sister, and that both her children had finally found a safe harbor after years of storms. The weight of silence had been lifted. In its place came words of healing, of promise, of possibility, and the first tentative foundations of what might, with time and patience and love, become a family.